Beloved Community Talks.
Well, hello and welcome to the King Center Beloved Community Talks. This is a special edition of our Beloved Community Talks where we are focusing on women, the soul of America, commemorating the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Many people famously are familiar with August 28th because of the historic speech that my father delivered, I Have a Dream, on that day in 1963. But before there was a March on Washington on August 28th, something else occurred on August 28th. And tonight we want to remember and lift up Emmett Till, who on August 28th, 65 years ago, was brutally and senselessly murdered for allegedly whistling and flirting with a white woman. It was his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, who refused to let them quickly bury her son, but chose to have him brought back to Chicago and decided to have an open casket so America could witness what had happened horrifically to her son. This, of course, sparked activism and resistance from the Black community and arguably laid the foundation for what eventually sparked what we call the modern civil rights movement, where another woman, Mrs. Rosa Parks, refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus in 1955 on December 1st. And of course, you know the rest of that history. So tonight, what we want to do is we want to remember that history, but we also want to come forward to the day and really talk about and highlight how women have always been influencing and leading in the movement. They may not have been on the front line, but leadership, in my humble opinion, is about influence. And women were extremely influential, as we said with Mamie Till Mobley, Rosa Parks. I can call the list, Joanna Robinson and the Women's Political Council. There's so many different women that were very influential in history. And as we move forward to today, that is also the case. I'm wearing black and white tonight, and you will see others wearing black and white tonight because we've been asked to do that in honor of Emmett Till. But tonight we're going to really focus on 1963, 2020, August 28th, and events surrounding that, and events that are right now in our trajectory as we deal with these very difficult issues of racial and social equity in our country. And I want to bring something to our attention. In my mother's memoir, My Life, My Love, My Legacy, she made this statement: no woman was allowed to make a major speech. And this, she's talking about the March on Washington, 1963. Though Daisy Bates, substituting for Myrlie Evers, delivered 149 words. This was very upsetting to me, especially when there were so many battle-weary female veterans who deserved an opportunity to speak. Fannie Lou Hamer, remember her? Sick and tired of being sick and tired, fighting for voting rights. Rosa Parks, Daisy Bates, very influential mentor of students. Diane Nash Bevel, a part of the SNCC. Ella Baker, who helped organizing SNCC. Dorothy Cotton, who worked in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference with my father. Juanita Abernathy, who stood side by side in leadership with her husband, Ralph Abernathy. Dorothy Height, do we remember Dorothy Height? And I've got to pause there because in 1963, Dorothy Height was one of the strategists of the 1963 March on Washington. She was in many of the pictures, but as we said, no woman was allowed to take that stage on that day to deliver a keynote. Wow. And I want you to also know that on that day, the women and the men were separated in two separate marches going to the memorial. I remember my mother being so excited. She was looking forward to the opportunity to march side by side with my father. But then the news came that she had to march with the women while he marched with the men. Woo! So I know there are many people, as we look at the current day March on Washington, and we want to commend Reverend Al Sharpton and my brother Martin Luther King III for calling us back to Washington under the circumstances that we are faced with today that look similar and seem similar to what was happening in 1963. We didn't have the right to vote back then. And today our voting rights are being threatened. There are those that are seeking to suppress our right to vote. Back then, they were fighting for jobs and freedom, and we are still fighting as African Americans, as Black Americans, for jobs and freedom. Now, I could argue that a lot of things have really changed. I could lay it out for you tonight. I don't have time to do that because things have changed. But you might say, it seems like nothing has changed. But one thing I want to point out is what we're talking about tonight. What has definitely changed is back in the movement and during the March on Washington, women were not allowed to be on the forefront. But as I said, women were leading because they were influencing. They were making decisions, strategizing in the room, planning. And we have one tonight who's going to join us in a little bit, who was a part of the planning team. And so that has changed. Ironically, people don't realize that women have always been there. We just have not been recognized. Think about it. The 1955 bus boycott was started by women. You said, no, Bernice, it was E.D. Nixon. It was your daddy. It was all the others. And Fred Gray was right there. Yes, they were. They were on the forefront. They were the faces. But it was the Women's Political Council and Joanna Robinson, as I said, who suggested that there be a boycott. They had been looking for an opportunity. And this was their time when Mrs. Rosa Parks was arrested. Women, Rosa Parks and the Women's Political Council sparked the modern civil rights movement. And you need to know that. And as we fast forward today, it is really women who are on the forefront of this current day movement, that are activists on this forefront, that are authors, that are writers, that are commentators, that are strategizing, that are mobilizing, that are organizing. Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 women. And so women are now being recognized. We've always been there. And thank God we have women who are even now telling our stories. And so we have an author that's going to be on later during our conversation because women are doing it. My mother said, women, if the soul of the nation is to be saved, I believe you must become its soul. And back in 2010, I was speaking to a group of women business leaders, and the Holy Spirit just had me saying to them, you know, I believe we have entered into the century of the woman. Wow. I didn't know what I was saying. I was just speaking under the unction of the Holy Spirit. And I've watched as women have emerged and been catapulted into their proper place of leadership at the forefront. But they have always been influential. So we're going to talk about the roles of women and their influence back during the March on Washington. And we're going to fast forward to women and their influence today in this movement for racial and social equity in our nation. And I'm happy to be joined tonight by a co-host, Goddess. Good evening, Goddess. I'm glad to have you join me on tonight. And give me your position again with Twitter.
Yes, how are you, Dr. King? Thank you so much for having me tonight. You know, my position is I'm the Global Director of Culture and Community at Twitter. And, you know, it's a new role. I was just feeling your words every time you speak. I'm so moved, and just thinking of all the women that came before me, before, you know, all of us who have been doing this work. And, you know, I am really proud to have a position that was created to specifically connect with women like that, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the, you know, the Dorothy Heights of today, making sure that they have a voice, that they are elevated, and other marginalized groups around the world. It is my job to make sure that we have a connection with them, because they must be heard. And this leadership must continue in the way that you mentioned and talked so eloquently about before. So I'm so excited to be here tonight. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Glad to have you. And I'm excited too, because we have to continue to unveil and uncover the role of women throughout history, Black women in particular, that we're kind of focusing on tonight, because there's this whole misnomer, you know, that women somehow were not significant, you know, that they were just the cooks, you know, and they were just passing out flyers, but women were strategizing. They were very strategic. Women were making decisions and have always been making decisions. And so we want to highlight that. We want to continue to tell those stories. We want to continue to expose the number of women that were involved in the movement. There wouldn't have been a movement, in fact, if it had not been for women. Just like right now, there would not be a movement if it were not for the women. We make up the movement. As Mother said, we're the soul of a lot of stuff.
We push it forward, and we continue this. So I'm so excited, and I think now, you know, with technology and where we are able to kind of write the history books as we go, instead of kind of waiting to see if we'll be included in those stories where so many people and women who fought for change have been excluded. So I'm excited to have this conversation tonight to make people aware of the role that so many women had in pushing societal change forward for human and civil rights. I'm excited.
And I am too. And so that day, August 28th, 1963 in particular, there were a couple of women, Mahalia Jackson, and I can't remember the woman's name, who sang on the program, but they did not have a speaking place on the program, which is really disturbing to me. But nonetheless, there was one person who happened to be invited and to speak on that day, not on the main platform, though. I want you to hear this, but she was being invited to speak. And we want to hear from her to really understand the context in which she was invited. I can suppose it was because her husband, Medgar Evers, had been brutally murdered, you know, at his home in the back. We just had that experience, you know, and that was in June. And I would argue that it probably was one of the catalysts to further push for this March on Washington, because there have been conversations previously by A. Philip Randolph, as you know, about having a March on Washington. But I think with each incident, it's just kind of added some more fuel to the fire. And I think that may have been the reason, but I really want to hear from her. So we've invited Mrs. Myrlie Evers, to join us today as we commemorate this 50th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And as we said, Mrs. Evers, you were invited to speak that day. And I want to share with everyone that you had such a special relationship with my mother. You, Dr. Shabazz, and my mother were sister friends and spent time together. And you all had that commonality of having to deal with husbands who had been assassinated and raising children, and being able to understand each other's common struggle and have a place as a place of solace that other people wouldn't possibly understand. So I thank you for that friendship with my mother. But for the sake of everybody else, Mrs. Myrlie Evers is a voting rights activist, chairman emeritus of the NAACP. Her husband, Medgar Evers, at the time that he was murdered, was serving as a field secretary of the NAACP in Mississippi. She is founder of the Medgar and Merle Evers Institute. And I did not know this. You are a gifted musician. I want to hear about what well, okay. She's both a civil rights activist, and as we said, widow of a civil rights activist, Medgar Evers, an author, artist, scholar, and again, a dear friend, a very dear friend, was a very dear friend of my mother. So welcome, Dr. Evers. And I want to go back to that time period in that day, because you were supposed to say some words in 1963 on August 28th, and you were not able to make it. Can you just give us an understanding of how you came to be invited and what happened that you didn't make it that day, that Daisy Bates was kind of given the mic to say something to recognize the women activists?
Things happen in mysterious ways.
Yes.
As my grandmother used to say to me, it's wonders to perform. Just let me say too, I'm so appreciative of being invited to be on this show and to see you and others, but particularly you, Miss Bernice, because I know the love that was there for you, your siblings, that your mother had for the family. And Dr. King, I don't want to become emotional with this, but there were three of us that were as thick as thieves. Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, and Merle Evers. We shared so much. The love for our husbands, the love for our children, appreciation for each other. And we were a support system that I don't think anyone could destroy. Death, of course, has taken its place. But I am just so delighted to be able to be with you today and everyone else. This is a particularly tough time for me because all of the memories come flashing back. As I look at what is happening in the country of my birth, I wonder, when will it end? I wonder, will it end? And I look at the young leadership now and I say to myself, there is still hope.
Yes.
If I may go back to June the 12th, 1963, that was the day I lost the love of my life, my husband, the father of my three children, as he was assassinated, shot down in the driveway of our home. I remember so well that our children had been trained, if they heard a gunshot, that they were to fall to the floor. The two elder children were told that they had to get their 3-year-old brother, pull him to safety with them. That night of June the 12th, Medgar came home, got out of the car, and the sound of that bullet, I can still hear now. The children did exactly what their dad told them to do. Fall to the floor, get your 3-year-old brother, and pull him into the bathroom because they had decided that was the safest place in which to go. I ran to the door, opened the door, screaming. Medgar had pulled himself just a few feet to the front of the car. Our next door neighbor came out firing his gun because that was a plan of what was going to happen, if that happened. Our children came out screaming, "Daddy, get up, Daddy." Shortly after that, in a minute or two, police call was there. So it said they had to be somewhere nearby, very close by. I think you know the rest of the story. You read about it, you heard about it. Medgar's last words, I am told, when he was in the hospital, was "turn me loose." I know you've heard that term being used in another song. Those were Medgar Evers' last words that he spoke. Turn me loose. Doesn't that apply today too?
Yes.
Are we not still saying, turn me loose? Because I'm moving forward regardless of whether you hold on to me or not. That was the lesson of Dr. King, but his was one of non-violence. Medgar was assassinated in the driveway of our home. I was scheduled to speak at the march at Washington, but I missed my plane. Daisy Bates spoke in my place. Her speech was exactly 148 words, I'm told. For the march on Washington, women were not listed as featured speakers. We were assigned to be tributes. Negro women freedom fighters. The tribute introduced Daisy Bates, Diane Nash, Quincy Lee, Rosa Parks, and Gloria Richardson. The voices of wives, mothers, etc. were not heard. My story was heard through newspapers and magazines. Women spoke, if that's what you want to call it, before the official start of the march. Medgar's body was viewed at a church on 14th Street in D.C. before his burial at Arlington Cemetery. People not being oppressed, but discriminated against and killed because of their color of the skin. The original march was conceived as a march of jobs. But in 1963, progressed with demonstrations in Birmingham, assassination of Medgar, and the introduction of the Civil Rights Act, and it became a march for jobs and freedom. There are two separate marches. Men proceeded down Pennsylvania Avenue with the press. Women walked down Independence Avenue. Women were placed in photos and allowed to sing, but not to be prominent speakers. A. Philip Randolph briefly recognized the wives of civil rights leaders like Medgar Evers and Herbert Lee, who was killed in 1961 for trying to register to vote. Women were not included in the meeting with the President, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, at the White House. You know, today the women are still losing their children, husbands, significant others, their lives to the cause. Too many times we see on the news another person losing their lives to unnecessary violence. The younger generation, Generation X, did not understand why civil rights organizations would still be needed in 20. We know that they are not passe, that we need them today as much as we did in the past. Not only are we stressed about police involvement, but we are also stressed in our homes, our jobs, and our neighborhoods. We're being killed while we sleep, sitting on our porches, in our cars, and we are losing our babies to violence that we can't control. I'm full.
Yes.
My heart overflows. I don't know how much time you have. What's the limitation? Have I gone over my time yet?
No,
come on, Dr. King. You know me. You know our age group. When we got started talking, we don't want to stop.
I know, because you all got a lot to deposit in our generation.
It's because
but I think Goddess, you were trying to ask her a question, Goddess.
I'm so stunned just by your words and hearing this story. And I know we have so much to discuss about the historical, just what you have contributed to this work and how you had to do that while you worked through trauma. Yes. You know, I think I would love to also bring in our Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton as well, as we kind of sift through the history of this moment to think back to all that you endured. And just when you talked about that pact, you know, I think about me and my two best friends, and you talked about Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King and yourself all had to
Three
work
Musketeers.
Three Musketeers, which I would love, that image in my living room. But how we all were forced to work under such horrific trauma, and my heart goes out to you that the work that you did and continue to do is what we stand on today. And I know our audience is probably just as moved as I am. Please do ask us questions. We're streaming on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube for Dr. Evers. And of course, we also want to bring in Congresswoman Eleanor Norton as well, so that we can continue to discuss this history. This is absolutely incredible. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I thank you. I could go on forever. I could take your entire show and talk, because I'm still so full, not only of what happened then, but the accomplishments that we have made and how far we have yet to go. So I will keep quiet at this point and turn it over to you and my other friends. But I will say this, that the women of the movement in the 60s, for those that are still left, we're still standing. And we're standing tall and proud and ready and willing to give until we take our last breaths.
Amen. I am so moved. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to also really discuss your work, on the planning committee for the march. I know you talked about that before, and we wanted to dig into what that experience was. Dr. King and I spoke yesterday just about how many people don't realize how much work goes into the logistics, the planning, the food, the legal defense funds. And I know, that is your profession. And I just think I would love to hear about the experience of what that was like.
Well, I must say I was a young woman in law school, and I was with the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, got a call from a friend saying that the march was going to be on. Did I want to come up and help organize the march? This is something that African Americans had been hoping for a very long time. And when I got an opportunity to work for the March on Washington, I left my SNCC post in the Delta in Mississippi and flew to New York, where we organized the March on Washington out of a 4-story brownstone under the genius organizing leadership of Bayard Rustin, who may have been the only person in the country who could have organized for the first time a mass march. Bear in mind that there had never been a march on Washington when it had been threatened in the 40s, but A. Philip Randolph called it off when Roosevelt agreed to a Fair Employment Practices Commission to allow African Americans to work in the war industry. So there was no experience. My job, remember, I'm a law student. I'm not a professional, but there weren't any professionals in organizing marches. So essentially my job was to help organize buses and trains to come to Washington on August the 28th. And that was not a very difficult job to do, but you didn't have social media. You didn't have what we have today. There were phone calls coming all the time. This was an almost 24-hour operation. I must say that perhaps my best experience in going to the march was that I volunteered to be the last one in the office because people were calling about rides and buses and trains into the night. But I did that with malice aforethought because I'm a native Washingtonian. I knew that I would get to fly as opposed to ride a bus or a train. And the reason I wanted to fly was not for the thrill of flying, but because I knew I could then see whether anyone had actually come to this march. And I must tell you that as I looked out of the window of that plane, I knew before that plane landed that this march, the first successful march on Washington, a march that attracted 250,000 people, I knew that this march was going to be a success by what I saw on the ground, which is people as far as the eye could see. It was a thrilling experience.
So can you tell us about some of the other roles that women played during that time in the planning process?
In the planning process for, remember,
the March on Washington?
For the March on Washington.
Yes.
Women certainly played a role in that brownstone. It's in not getting to speak. I mean, that women somehow dropped out altogether when even Murley was not able to speak. When of all people, you would have thought that Dorothy Height would have spoken.
Right, exactly.
Because she was one of the big six who organized the March on Washington. And for the life of me, I can't understand how they could possibly have left her out except for raw sexism.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
I think I listen to you now and think about, with someone being cut out of speaking and working at a place where your voice is constantly being heard and we can tweet our thoughts and our convictions every day. I find it just such an evolution to what you all stood up for. And now, no one's ever going to silence us again. No one's ever going to exclude us or omit us from the history book. So I'm so grateful, and we are so grateful for what you all have given to this movement. And I will say, I think what a shame that Dr. Evers did not get to take that stage, because I've been so moved tonight and what it could have been in history for, myself, my daughter, my mother, who would have seen and read that speech as well growing up. So I'm glad that we have the chance to have that conversation now. And I know, Dr. King, we're going to bring in two more guests if you wanted to get started to do that, to kind of talk about what is happening now with women in the movement.
So our next two guests are women who are leading as voices and vessels for social change today. Brittany Packnick, many of you all, Cunningham. I have to remember that, Brittany, that you're married now, is an educator, activist, founder and principal of Love and Power Works. Those two words sound familiar from a quote that my father talked about in terms of love and power. So Whitney, welcome to you. And also in this segment, we will be joined by writer, filmmaker, activist, Kimberly Latrice Jones. We want to welcome both of them, Brittany and Kimberly. Most of us remember Kimberly, in fact, and I don't want to get it wrong because you said it so powerfully. I just say it one time for us.
They are lucky that what Black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
Woo!
That's it.
That's it. And that is so amazing to me, because as I listen to Murley Evers and as I listen to Congressman Holmes Norton, these women have weathered a lot of storms. They've been through a lot of challenges at a time period when everybody was under the threat of whether or not they would live the next day as Black Americans. And yet we still are talking about, we want justice, we want freedom, we want equity. We're not talking about, we want to destroy you. And that speaks volumes to who we are as a race of people. I don't think there's any other race of people who could exude that in this country and perhaps in the world. I've always felt that there's a peculiar calling on people who are part of the Black race in America. I believe God placed us here for a reason to really, as my father called about, redeem the soul of America, to elevate people to a higher plane. And yet, you know, even though we're sick and tired and sick and tired of sick and tired of sick and tired of being sick and tired, more sick and tired today, and it's getting tougher and tougher, and it's pulling on every part of our emotional being, and causing us to get close to the edge and going over. I mean, wow, what you said. That's who we are. And women in particular, that's the role we have played time and time again through history. So talk to us as you listen to these women. I mean, they should, Miss Elvis in particular, should be bitter. You know what I'm saying? And just to see her there, with such eloquence and such dignity, it's. I mean, I said about my mother. I mean, I don't think I could have done it that way. So tell me, what do you ladies think as you sit here and listen to all of this?
So, Mrs. Evers, you're not going to remember this. I had to be maybe 12 or 13 years old, and you came to speak at Harris Stowe State University, which is the HBCU in my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. And my mother, who was very recently had become a widow, both of my parents are activists, and my father was a pastor, much in the tradition of you and Edgar Evers. We got to meet you afterwards, and I just remember being as in awe of your presence then as I am today, and recognizing that so many women, as you talked about that sisterhood between you and Mrs. King and Betty Shabazz, all three of you are women that I got to meet in my adolescence. And I'll never forget having Betty Shabazz actually sign a book of photographs from the era of you all's leadership, which is obviously still continuing. And she wrote Mrs. Malcolm X. And I remember, I think about that often, because I have to be willing to remember, as a Black woman in this moment and in this movement, like Kimberly and Goddess, I have to remember the sacrifice of the women of your generation who had to do the organizing and the strategizing and hold down the fort behind the scenes so that we could be on the front lines. And to recognize that living legends like you are still here to tell these stories, I am so, like God is, I am so deeply moved. I mean, my whole spirit is stirred. I am grateful for a lifetime commitment from you and from Congresswoman Holmes Norton, who is now my Congresswoman because I live in DC. There are so many ways in which I think it is easy for people in our generation to think that we are the first, that we are the only, that we are tougher, that we are stronger, that we are more creative, that we are more innovative. But history proves all of that wrong. And so I'm just so blessed and honored to be sharing space with you all this evening. And I am grateful that these stories are being told, Reverend King. I'm grateful that you've been creating the platform and continuing to extend the platform, because so many people still don't know the story. So many people still do not know about the Myrlie Evers Williams. So many people still do not know about the Daisy Bates. So many people still do not know about the rich legacy and history of women in the movement and Black women in the movement. And we have to be able to shout from the rooftops that the freedoms and privileges that we enjoy now, even while we're still in the fight, would not be possible if it were not for you all. It just wouldn't be possible. One of my favorite stories actually from the original march is that this moment that Mahalia Jackson, the Queen of Gospel, is the one who says and whispers behind Dr. King, tell him about the dream, Martin, that he had chosen this language about the check that America wrote Black people returning with insufficient funds, and that was the rhetoric he had decided upon that day. But as he started to riff on this idea, the dream came back into the conversation because Mahalia Jackson knew the balm that the people needed. That's one of the pieces of expertise that Black women always come with. We know how to give the people exactly what they need when they need it. That's what Kim was doing on that video, right? She was giving us what we needed when we needed it. That's what Myrlie Evers Williams was doing, and I was 12 or 13. giving me what I didn't even know I needed at the time. And that is the brilliance and beauty of Black women. And we are able to do that now in ever more present and exposed ways, because you all did that from offices late night, Congresswoman Holmes Norton, from planes that were missed, and from podiums throughout your entire life, Mrs. Evers Williams, from pulpits, Reverend King. We are because you are. And so I am just, I could go on, but I will stop, because I'm just so floored and so honored to be able to share some space with you all.
May I just want to thank you for recognizing that and for speaking it. And I would just like to say that Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, and I became 3 of the best friends ever, because we could talk to each other when we could not speak to anyone else. People did not understand, and they said, "Oh, the 3 of you are so close." Indeed, it was tragedy, but it was also an understanding and a love and respect for each other and what we were going through, and other women, particularly women of color, and how we were segregated within our own society. People would say, when they would see us at events, "Oh, there are the 3 widows." And we finally reached the point where we said, "Oh, yes, the 3 widows are here, but we're standing on our own 2 feet. And if you don't like it, move over to the side, because we're coming through." And that was something that the 3 of us bonded on. I look at our younger generation today, and I feel so blessed to see the cohesiveness and the willingness to work together, because it was not necessarily like that in the 60s. We were quite separate, competing with each other on something that was so near and dear to the existence of all of us. My strength, yes, coming from the Lord, but it came from my relationship with Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King, because we could call each other in the middle of the night. If you couldn't talk, you could cry, and everybody understood. And it was a sisterhood that I am so thankful to have been a part of. And it widened indeed. But I recall that the 2 remaining ones of us said we have to continue to hold hands, so to speak. We have to continue to have the strength, the charm, the beauty of Coretta Scott King, the ability to sensitize America, regardless of race, creed, or color, to what we are facing today, to what we have faced in the past, and where do we go, which I think was Dr. King's thing, where do we go from here? That question is still so relevant today, so very relevant. And with that, I'll just leave it.
And I know Congresswoman Norton and Mrs. Evers, we don't have you for much longer, but I wanted to give you, Kim, just a moment to also just hear from you how it is to hear about the history, a torch that you're literally carrying right now from these 2 women as well before they leave us.
It is just an honor to share space with them. I am blessed that I was put in a position as a very young girl growing up in Chicago, that my after school programs were at Operation Push and the DuSable Museum. And so being educated about the culture and the women who came before me was just kind of built into the system there. I've said this before, and a lot of people have heard me say this. The first line from my speech that went viral, I actually borrowed from Reverend Willie T. Barrow, who who was still around when I was a kid running around Operation Push as a little girl. And so that information that I received from her, I carried it with me for 30 years until it was time for me to give it to the world. And it wasn't mine to give, it was the ancestors that gave it. And I tell people that all the time. Halfway through that speech, I actually don't even remember what I said. Like, I looked back at it and I was like, oh, okay. Because I feel like it definitely came from above, and it definitely came from the women who poured into me, who I got to experience. And so it's so funny because I did an oratory competition when I was in 8th grade, and it was all about the Evers. So, you know, I've carried this with me my entire life. And I think that that's part of why it's very important that we have these intergenerational conversations. It's super important that we have these intergenerational conversations, because just sitting here today, I've learned things that I never knew. And so we're always in the process, if we're smart, of knowing what we can do, which is to learn and to grow and continue. And as I carry the torch, I don't carry it as a fresh pickup. I carry it as it's been passed down for 400 years. And so I just want to honor the both of you and say that I'm grateful and thankful to be in this space with you. And I am excited that I do get to share space with my sisters in a very different way now. If I hit a brick wall, I call Shar Bates, I call Yanaja, I call Tamika Mallory, I reach out to these people for support and information and love. And we do love on each other. I only get to see Brittany on Zoom these days.
It's always good. It always makes my heart glad.
But you know, I'm excited to see women actually having a voice, and like God has said, like having a digital space in which, whether people want to hear us or not, we're gonna talk. And so I'm grateful for that. But in my gratitude for that, I honor the fact that you guys did the work and did your due diligence despite attention. That, as the kids say, it wasn't for the gram, it was for the work. It was for what needed to be done, and it was for the people. And I'm so grateful to you all for that.
And let me just add before they leave us. They continued to do the work even after my father was assassinated, as we talked about. So that people understand tonight, these are not just women of history. These are women that still are doing work. Congressman Holmes Norton is fighting for us every day in Congress. And I know she is championing DC statehood as we speak. And so we want to thank her for her continual service and bridging from the history to now, because this is a struggle. As my mother said, struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. And that just means as the generation of time passes, not necessarily a certain age group, we still have to win those victories in the freedom movement. And so thank you, Congressman Holmes Norton, for what you're doing to still stand in spite of all the energy you put into it in the 60s and just coming forward. So we want to recognize that too, that it's not just history, but we're dealing with women who just, I mean, you all are, wow, you encourage us and you inspire us as we continue to do this work, and know that, you know, longevity, the longevity is very inspiring.
And before you ladies depart, please, I would love to hear just any last words that you have for us. You know, we mentioned how literally this week echoes some of what you all fought for, back in 1963 and beyond. Starting with you, Congresswoman Holmes Norton, what would your kind of final words for tonight be to all of us in the audience listening?
You know, I started as a civil rights activist. I became a member of Congress, but the mission is the same. I was trying to get legislation passed when I was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. My mission today is to make sure the justice in the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is passed. The movement threads through my life, however, and that is what guides me and will continue to guide me.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, if I may,
yes,
just
please.
in closing, I am so thankful, that's a word, to see a younger generation of our women coming along and taking the movement to higher levels. I recall only too well when Dr. Betty Shabazz, Coretta Scott King, and I would go into a group of people, and the whispers would be, "Oh, they're the widows." As though that was the only thing that we had to offer. We learned to make jokes about it because there was so much more to all three of us than what sometimes the public saw. Certainly more than what many of the males wanted to be. So in a sense, we were fighting on two different levels. The racist one, if you want to call it that, which it was, and the ones where women should stay in their place. I've forgotten who said this, but we have no place. Every place is our place. And, you know, that has been accepted somewhat reluctantly in some places, but I am always one to speak up and challenge that statement or that thought, because this nation, our race, the different races, would not be as far ahead in this society as we are were it not for women who were willing to sacrifice, to struggle, to teach, to train leaders, to go out there and attack the same racist policies that we see existing today and that are even stronger, I believe, than they were in 1963 when Medgar Evers was assassinated.
No.
This call to freedom, to action, will be with us, I believe, as long as we are human beings. Who is willing to stand up and challenge that? And I just thank all of you, and particularly Dr. King, for putting this together so we could speak our minds. I have another 1,000 minutes of words to say. I know I can't, but my heart is here. I'm thankful to still be here to see the progress that we have made. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And we are grateful to both you, Mrs. Evers, and you, Congressman Holmes Norton, for taking this moment to share with us tonight, to be with us. And we appreciate everything that you have not only done, but you continue to do. We are just going to try to do our best in the role that we play in this generation of time, to move, not just move the needle. It's time to literally do some deconstruction and reconstruction in this country. So we're just glad we've been chosen to live during this time and to stand on your shoulders and be inspired by your examples, and know that we have the strength and endurance. And I just have to keep saying that because Congressman Holmes Norton, you've been serving a long time. And we draw strength from that, that we can continue to push forward, because you get weary in this work. You get tired, and there are moments, I'm sure, when people want to give up and give out, but you inspire us that we cannot do that. We may want to take a momentary break, but we have to always stay in the fight and in the struggle, because there are generations that are behind us that we must make our contribution to this struggle for. So thank you all so much for taking this time on tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. I got
to I'm emotional. I'm trying to hold on here.
Yeah, I'm like, I didn't put my
Let it flow. This lash might come off, but just let it flow, because people, we often don't get to actually touch and hear from and learn from, like I said, the folks who are living legends, the people who have created what we enjoy now. Too many of us let people not have their flowers until they're gone. So So thank you for making sure that we started this conversation where it needed to begin.
There was one. Oh, I'm so sorry, Dr. King.
Go ahead,
there was something that really stuck out to me, and I was so glad that Congresswoman Holmes Norton kind of pointed it out. She said really pointedly, like, it was sexism. You know, she really just called out that we are fighting those two battles, which Mrs. Evers also really talked about. But I've been thinking a lot about how misogyny works and doesn't work. And I know for a long time, everyone was always trying to put one person as the leader, right? Is it this person? Is it that? You know, and I feel like what happens with women is that people don't look at women as leaders, right? So we almost kind of, through misogyny, get to be decentralized and able to dig in and do the work. I'm so curious, because I feel like we have a lot of very strong women. And you know, I feel as just grateful to have this conversation as a conduit, someone who tries to keep one of the tools that we use, right? And, you know, working for us as we do this work, but not on the ground as you two are, Kim and Brittany. So I would just love to hear from you. Do you feel that now, I know they mentioned, you know, how women kind of all weren't seeing eye to eye back then, but do you feel that women are almost allowed to kind of find their space in their communities because people are not putting women in a place of leadership as one leader who everything is on their back? So it's almost like misogyny, but kind of working. And again, just before you answer, just please, any questions or comments, audiences, please, we're live streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So before you all jump in, but that's just something that really just stuck out to me. I would love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that now, you know, women really are leading the conversation. So we're in a very interesting time, especially kind of like boots on the ground in the protest. The women who are organizing a lot of the protests that I'm attending, they're calling me and saying, hey, sis, can you come speak? And I have this person coming to speak and this person coming to speak. Could you show up? And so because they are doing the organizing and because we are in a different space, they are actually selecting who they want to give space to and who they want to give voice to. And so I'm grateful that a lot of my sisters, you know, who are in that organizing space call on me to speak, and other sisters as well. And even just in terms of interviews, you know, with people like Brittany, like in a space where she can say, I want this sister to, you know, be on this show with me and to interview her and have a conversation with her. And I think we have had an evolution in which we could pull forward. Now, that is not to say that misogyny does not still exist in the movement and that we still don't experience it. And there are still moments where you hear the dog whistles and it's very clear on why something didn't transpire. But I think because we have a collective of lifting each other up, because we are dedicated to lifting each other up. And again, the times have changed in terms of where and how we create and can create those spaces. A lot of these spaces that we have where we can do that just didn't exist when those women were coming up. There was no space for them to grab somebody in. And so we're blessed that there has been some evolution in which, you know, we are now in that space where we can help each other out. But we definitely do look out for each other. And a lot of us, even if we've never really met, we'll just DM each other and say, hey, sis, I see you. And I just want to make sure that you're okay. And if you need anything or need me, here's my number, call on me. And so that is truly a blessing. And it's funny because the first panel a few months ago I did with Dr. King, she said something that stuck with me that I've also carried, is that there are a lot of people who have been shouldering this burden for a long time that have been doing the work. So a lot of times when I get an idea, when I'm in a situation where I know I need to push the envelope on something, I no longer think, okay, let me go call somebody and start an organization in order to do. I start combing through my friends and say, do you know someone who's already doing this? Do you know someone who's in the education space? Do you know someone, you know, who's already in the political space in this way that I could lend my voice to what they're already doing? Because also as a writer, I'm so glad that we brought up people like Mahalia Jackson and stuff like that. As a writer, as much as I've been on the ground, I also understand that it's very important that I take some time and pull back and put pen to pad and make sure that I'm documenting this moment for us in the word and not leaving it to someone else. And it's been my sisters in the movement who have been very supportive of that. One of my closest and dearest friends, Queen Yanajaha, she calls me all the time and says, sis, are you writing? Don't forget, we need your voice in the book as well as in the street. Don't think just because you're in the you're not supposed to sit at that laptop. I'm sure your publisher is waiting on something new from you. Right. And so it's that support system of my sisters that honestly that keeps me going.
And I think what you're saying is so important about the various roles that we play. I owe my Black woman editor the rest of my edits for this book myself. So I feel you on that. But one of the best things that Black women do, and we do with such consistency, is we make room for others. So when you see Black women serving across movements, you see us in the front, the back, the middle. We're like in the planning meeting before the march. We're in the planning meeting after the march. We're in the pulpit. We're in the, the what do we call it? The narthex in the church, right? That front foyer. We're everywhere because our gifts and our talents are necessary everywhere. And the fact, to your point, God, is that we can actually spread this talent out, that we don't need everybody to be Kim because Kim is Kim. So we need somebody else to play their role and somebody else to play their role. And I think that historically we have seen Black women be really intentional about making room for people, right? I think about your work at Twitter, Goddess. I think about the fact that you are consistently expanding conversations where people do not hear Black voices, literally to billboards, right? People are hearing from Black folks that it's like, you don't even have to get on Twitter to follow because I'm gonna put this billboard in your face and you're gonna have to hear from us, right? That is a beautiful and powerful act. Reverend King, I think so much about how you've been so intentional to mentor and support future generations, right? And everyone doesn't make that choice. Everyone doesn't make the choice to reach forward and say, I want to be a resource. I want to amplify your work. I want to support your work. I want to give you a platform. And you've chosen to do that. In terms of the example of your mother, right? I think about Coretta Scott King during the 20th anniversary of the March on Washington. So this several decades ago, deciding to make space for Audre Lorde because she wanted to stand up in support of LGBTQ rights, and there was no one who identified as queer who was being made space for, and she made the space for them, right? That helped usher in a broader era of us being able to talk about all Black lives mattering and not just male Black lives or straight Black lives or cisgender Black lives or Christian Black lives or able-bodied Black lives, etc. So what Black women do when we enter is we make room for everybody else. And I think that there's so much power that we have to recognize and what Black women have done to make room for everybody to be a part of our movements, whether we're leading from the front or the back or someplace in between.
And I'm so glad you brought up that point because I was just getting ready to talk about that. And you were feeling me, you were vibing.
Yeah, right there.
It was Marianne Schnall, is that her name? That titled her article, When Black Women Lead, We All Win. And it's so true. I mean, as I've been just looking at through history, I said there's only one group of people who make sure that everybody is a part. And I don't want to call it out and shame some of the others, but it's just that it's our time now because this history of people being marginalized, disenfranchised, being left out is over. I mean, I think that's the sentiment that's being expressed right now. And so that's why I think we are in the place that we're in today. I want to ask a question though, because everybody's using the word movement, and I just want to get clarity because what I'm finding over and over again, we're speaking a lot of words, and we need to catch everybody up because sometimes we use words and people mean different things by different words. And I think the beauty of having someone like my father during the movement, and he was a good wordsmith. He was able to clarify the different things he was speaking about. So when we talk about the word movement today, when people say it, what are they really referring to? And how does today's movement connect with the movement that was taking place during that previous time period? Where are the threads, in other words, and what is this we're calling movement?
I mean, I'm happy to start it off and then pass it over to you, Kimberly. I think that what we are seeing, much in the ways that we saw then, is we are seeing an interconnected constellation of individuals and organizations who are attacking injustice from every single angle we have available to us. So we've got organizations like the NAACP LDF working on the legal end and trying to protect and preserve our voting rights, among many other things. We've got organizations like Color of Change that I believe is 15 years old today, that formed in the wake of Hurricane Katrina because Black people were not being cared for by the government that we support, and has since pushed back on all kinds of industries to make sure that our collective voices can be heard through digital organizing. We've got organizations at the grassroots level, right? In my hometown, Action St. Louis was born of the Ferguson protests. I will forever be a proud member of the Ferguson uprising. And Action St. Louis, along with other organizers and organizations from across town, worked for 2 years to close the workhouse. And a few weeks ago, finally were able to get the legislation passed to close a medium security prison in the middle of the city of St. Louis. So we're attacking this thing from every level, local, state, federal. We are attacking this thing from the viewpoint of every industry. So we're talking about equity in the workplace. We're talking about equal pay. We're talking about criminal justice. We're talking about the carceral system, education, housing, the economy, all of it applies to Black people. So we are working on all from every angle. And I think that what people have to recognize is that even if the organizational titles are different or the tactics are different, that all of us are oriented toward equity and full liberation for Black people. And we're not stopping until we arrive at precisely that point.
All right.
That's it right there.
That's like a rap right there, right? Like a bow on it and deliver it. Good God.
I felt that.
Yeah.
Woo.
I don't have much to add to that. I think Brittany handled that.
So funny.
Wow.
It's so interesting because it made me think of something as well as you all were speaking, we were talking about just women leaders and how we are used to doing everything, right? You know what I mean? How we kind of make sure there's space for everybody. One thing that I think I've really noticed, especially now that we kind of have the mic, we talked about social media, we talked about the way that technology and how we're kind of able to be heard now, but we don't let people forget the women who were the victims. And, you know, we don't let people forget Breonna Taylor. We don't let people forget Mercy Mack. You know, we don't let people forget Renisha McBride. And I think that is such an important moment to think about. And that really is a testament to what you all have done, is we've expanded even those who are hurt by the discrimination to make sure that we're not forgotten in that. And that's just something that just kind of came to my mind. And I think it's really important to call out because it's important. And I did see there's some questions coming in as we think of on that point. Someone's asking, and a few people want to know, what should we focus on? I think, Brittany, you kind of just went through a ton of different things that affect the entire movement. There's this umbrella, right? But where should people focus? Is there a focus? Should it be decentralized? Should you focus where you can make a difference? Should you focus on the victims and their families and justice specifically, restoratively there? I'm curious your thoughts on things.
Yeah, for me personally, I think that everything that she listed is important. And I think I'll say it in two parts. First of all, I think people should focus on their specialty. This is the time now for everybody to hone in on what they specialize in. If you're interested in education equity, then you need to get with people who are working on that and work on that. If you are invested in voter rights, you need to find out which organizations have great movement on that and focus in on that. So I think people need to specialize in things that they actually have a passion for, because at this stage, this is still going to be another long road. This is not going to happen tonight. This is not going to happen in 30 days. It's not going to happen in 90 days. So we need people who are willing to step up and stand the test of time and actually exercise endurance. And the best way that I know people exercise endurance is by doing something that they actually feel passionate about. And we were talking about the movement. You're going to be in motion on something that you care about. You may get stalled if things go wrong in something that you're not particularly invested in. But I think as an overall umbrella, as we talk about equity, I think people are very afraid often to use the word because there's always so much pushback. But I think reparations still needs to be at the forefront, because a lot of the disparaging moments in our journey and all the many areas in which we suffer from disparities is rooted in economics. Because slavery in and of itself was an economic decision. The 13th Amendment was an economic decision. So a lot of these laws and things that have been put in place, that were put in place in particular for Black people, which is why we need a plan that is specific to Black people, because the ability of America to withhold generational wealth has been targeted for Black people. Between 1936 and 1965, the U.S. underwrote $120 billion in lending money for homes, because they know that home ownership is the fastest and quickest way to develop generational wealth. And 98% of that went to white families, and 2% of that went to the remainder of us. So when you talk about things like redlining, which prevent us from having the luxury of getting business loans, we're mostly opening our businesses with our savings and our 401ks and a life insurance policy that was left by your grandmother. We don't have access to open the capital that we need to maintain successful businesses. So in terms of equity, there's going to have to be a comprehensive economic plan that is put in place for Black people, and not a blanketed Black plan that's like, this is for the world's proletariat. No, they exercise Black codes and everything else to make sure that Black people did not have actual equity in this nation. And so we have to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
So Kim, Brittany, because we talk about reparations, what is your perspective on what that should look like?
I didn't know. Okay. I think there are a couple of things, right? And I think that, lots of folks have talked about doing a study, which is necessary. To be clear, that study should have been done decades ago. John Conyers put that bill forward every single year in Congress because he was like, y'all keep telling me we don't know.
He did my father's holiday like that too, every single year.
He said, oh, we're gonna keep proposing this bill until you pass it.
Yes.
Folks will tell you, well, we don't know exactly how to do it. What's the plan? We need a study. We've been trying to get the study done for decades, right? So here we are. I think that direct payments are very legitimate. I also think that a number of targeted and specific programs that undo the damage that has been done over generations is necessary to think about, because the key word for what Kim just talked about is generational. That it's not going to be an instantaneous fix, because if it took multiple generations to get to this point, it will take multiple generations to move in a different direction. So this is the kind of work that we need to see. I mean, we are in a pandemic right now where the majority of PPP loans did not go to Black-owned businesses, right? And that the folks in our communities who have been trying to engage in cooperative economics were left out of that stimulus package, even though there are things on paper that said that they weren't supposed to be left out. So the only other thing I would add to what Kimberly already so brilliantly said about how people should engage is that they should engage where their specialty is, and they should engage locally. A lot of these decisions are made locally by your city council, by your mayor, by your precinct, by your alderperson, by your ANC representative. If you live in the District of Columbia, there are so many people who are making these tiny decisions that you think have nothing to do with you, and they have everything to do with you. Link up with the people who are doing the work locally to make sure that as this symphony comes together all around the country, that what LA needs, LA is getting. What DC needs, DC is getting. What St. Louis needs, St. Louis is getting, because people have boots on the ground and are invested locally. So much of the wealth looting, if we want to use that word, because we know we heard it a lot during the RNC this week, but the wealth that has been looted from our communities, plenty of those decisions were made at the local and state level. And because we're not engaged in those spaces, those decisions get made. And by the time we find out about them, it's too late. So we have to make sure that we engage in our area of specialty and that we engage locally, so that the direct things that have to do with us and our families and our ability to create that kind of generational wealth, if we are going to continue to live in a capitalist space, can actually happen.
Incredible. I know we're a little bit close to almost out of time, but I wanted to make sure we got a few more questions from our incredible audience members. This is a really interesting question. I think it's important. I would love to hear both of you ladies' thoughts on this. But Dee Turner asks, how can we reach women who perceive themselves as invisible? She mentions that she walked around today and saw women who felt that almost like their voice didn't matter. They felt that they were in these circumstances that were just, devalued them, but they felt they needed to come to DC. They needed to be a part of the movement, but feel as though they're almost kind of in this space where they're not seen, they're not heard. How can someone kind of find a way in to feel that they can make their voice known?
I think there are some amazing organizations that are doing exactly that kind of work. When I think about my good friend Nicola, who runs the Girls Who Brunch tour, that's a 33 city tour. She touches at 33 cities pre-COVID on the road. In which she goes in and she specializes in reaching out to marginalized girls and women and making sure that they have a day of not only pampering, but education and access to resource. I have a really good friend of mine who says this all the time, and I couldn't agree with him more, that the best thing that has come out of moments in which we really got things done was when we created and invented programming for us, by us. When you think about what the Panthers did with their breakfast program, when you think about, even like I said before, me as a child, being able to go to an after school program at DuSable Museum and being able to go to an after school program at Push Rainbow Coalition, it made all the difference in the world in my development. I grew up, people always ask me about my purple hair, like why I always wear purple hair. I tell them this is my dog whistle. This is my way to let the hood girls know that I represent you, that I grew up with the least of them. I grew up on the south side of Chicago in one of the neighborhoods that people hear about with the gangs and drugs and violence. And the question that I have to reflect on myself so that I can properly be of service to women who feel like that is, what was the difference between my journey and the journey of other women who grew up in my same community? How did I get out? How was I able to have a better lived experience than they were able to have? And what it was the reach back of women and programming in my community that gave a voice to me, even at a time when I didn't have voice. I have a learning disability. I have ADHD. It was people like Reverend Willie T. Barrow who told me that had nothing to do with my intellect. She actually told me that I just had a superpower and I learned different. And that's how I had to view the world from this point on. And that it was unfortunate that the world wasn't smart enough to see how my brain works. And so these are things that I've carried with me my entire life. And this is why, as a writer, I predominantly write young adult novels. I write for teenagers. And I make sure that when I'm touring, that I'm going in Title I schools. I introduce my conversation by talking about my learning disability. And every single time I watch 5 heads that were asleep on the desk pop up, because they make that connection that if she make it, I can make it. If she came from where I came from, I can come from. I tell people all the time, the people who were left behind the most were the hood feminists, those who, the Black girls who were the architects of cool, who taught us how to be, how to live, how to say, how to breathe. And while they're creating it and developing it, we're telling them that they're less than, we're telling them that they have no value. And then we monetize it and sell it. And I say this time and time again, because what I want people to recognize is that the power is within you. Yeah. So there was a reason whoever wrote that question, that when you walk through the crowd today, those sisters felt comfortable expressing that to you. That is your gift. Your ear was their gift for this day. And so now that you've walked into that power, stay in it. Keep that crown on. Continue to walk in that gift and talk to those people and find the spaces in which you can continue to do that. Look for the organizations that are already doing that work and donate your time and your service, because clearly that's what God has called you to do.
I'll say for me that this conversation of invisibility, much like you and your just brilliant self. The invisibility that I really began to feel very early had to do with the fact that I was a girl being raised in the Black church. So my father was a professor of Black church history and Black liberation theology. My mother is also now an ordained minister in a convention that didn't ordain women for a very, very long time. And so the invisibility I experienced was steeped in what was supposed to be our spiritual practice. So it's a lot harder to continue to push back against patriarchy when somebody is trying to tell you, but God said it was supposed to be this way. And then they misquote scripture and they cherry pick scripture and they tell you the half of one scripture without telling you the other half of the scripture. And suddenly we're still supposed to go out and be these confident, brilliant women who keep getting pushed to the back and being told that's the way God wanted it. So I speak through the lens of my faith with a lot of intention, not because I think I'm better than anybody, but because I want to be heard exactly and precisely by those other Black women who heard a lot of the same things that we did. I'm grateful that my mother continued to push against that patriarchy. I'm grateful that my father is not somebody who subscribed to it. So that wasn't in my household, but it was most certainly in our practice. And I find myself thinking often about the women of the Bible, the women who have led entire spiritual revolutions across this globe, and much like the movement that we are discussing right now, in the spaces of the church and our spiritual practices, Black women and women have been pushed to the back, even though we gave you everything that you love. We have been the backbones of your institutions. We have been the backbones of your congregations. We were the ones giving the tithes and the offerings. We were the ones leading the auxiliary organizations. We were the ones doing the work in the community while somebody else was taking the credit for it. So I find, much like you are trying to make sure that you're heard precisely by the hood girls, I'm trying to make sure I'm heard precisely by the church girls who have been turned off by church folks who continue to tell us that our role is in the back and not the front. If that is what they believe, then they need to go have a little talk with Jesus about it, because that's not what he said. I think often about this idea that we all had a purpose before anybody had an opinion. So there are always going to be forces that come and try to render us invisible, usually because they are stuck in their own insecurity and they are threatened by our light. Sometimes your light can just shine too brightly for folks and they think they're going to burn up instead of actually have the ability to reflect it. So like Kim said, it's in you to actually embrace the power that you have and move forward with it despite what other folks have to say. The last thing that I'll say, especially to your point, Reverend King, about language. Black women have given us the language to better and more precisely have this conversation. So it's Kimberly Crenshaw who talked about and gave us the phrase intersectionality, that before people started using it popularly and misusing it popularly, that she was speaking through the lens of her identity as a Black woman legal scholar, and how many times she was written both out of the race conversation and the gender conversation, because as we know from a book that everybody should be reading, far too often all the women are white and all the men are Black, but some of us are brave, right? So in the bravery of Black womanhood, she said, she brings us this concept of intersectionality to say, and let me define it clearly, is that if you have more than one marginalized identity, that systems will intersect in your life differently than they will for other people. So Black women have particular oppressions that we have to overcome that are different than what white women endure. They are different than what Black men endure, and they're different than what other women of color endure. Indigenous women have unique intersectionalities. Asian women have unique intersectionalities. Heck, South Asian women and East Asian women have different intersectionalities. And these are all things that matter to the conversation. When we better understand intersectionality, we can better understand misogynoir, which is a word given to us by a Black queer feminist, Moya Bailey, who said it's not just about the sexism and it's not just about the racism. It is the unique intersection of those things have a particular pain associated with Black women. So Reverend King, when I saw you reach out, for example, to Meg Thee Stallion, given what happened to her in this hip hop community that wanted to erase the pain that she had suffered, you from another generation, another space saying, I see you, sister, and I'm not gonna let you fall, like we've got you. That was an important moment to see people across spectrums recognize what misogyny looks like, how it acts, how it walks around, how it breathes, how it lives, because we are always the ones who show up to make sure that we attack that. So those words are important as we explain to people why specifically women and Black women are rendered invisible. It is because of that intersectional oppression of misogyny. Tell it to people accurately so that they understand it's not a one-size-fits-all fix for us. We need the kind of community that approaches and attacks the issues that are unique to us.
Incredible. Well, I could sit here with you all day. I know we've got to wrap up right now, but I just think that it is interesting. I like to end on one word. I'm used to 280 characters, but we want to be brief. One word that you feel going into the future for this movement, for this work, for all of that we are hoping for and fighting for. I'll start. I think the word that comes to my mind is invigorated. I'm ready to go. I'm re-energized. So I would love to just kind of go around, and then I know Dr. King will take us out with some parting words.
I'm just going to say heady. I want us to put our heart away for a second and fight from our head.
Love it.
I'm going to say purposeful. I want us to make sure that we are operating in discipline and in clear purpose always.
Wow. Well, first of all, I'm going to say my word in a minute, but I want to thank you all first for this very enlightening, engaging, important conversation. I think there's a lot for people to chew on tonight and to think about. But the one thing that I think is understood clearly after this conversation tonight is that women are really the soul of this country. We are the glue. We are the integrators. We are the intersectionalists, if I could make that a word. We bring it all together. And without us, we will not get to that day where we see the social equity that we all want to see. And so thank you, Kimberly, for all the work that you're doing. And even though people didn't know you at the level they know you now, thank you for just being you and being consistent with that. And as we stay, as you said, as we stay focused in our passions and the things that drive us, we don't have to worry about whether there'll be space for us and things of that nature. There's plenty of room and plenty of work to do. And thank you, Brittany, for everything. Your activism and your background in education, I think, is so important, and will be critically important as we go forward, because there's been such miseducation in America all the way around. Obviously the white community needs to be re-educated, but we need to be re-educated as well, because we've all been brought up in this white supremacist system, and our thinking is off, and so we have to be retaught. And so, Goddess, thank you for everything you're doing in the world of Twitter, and even though the words are not as many as some would like, we thank God that we're learning how to communicate succinctly and simply and straightforwardly, because sometimes just 3 or 4 or 10 words says it all. Think about a movement made off of Black Lives Matter, 3 words.
That's right.
A movement, a new meaning to a movement made off of I can't breathe. Mm-hmm. So thank you, ladies, for everything that you are doing. And as my mother said, women, if the soul of the nation is to be saved, I believe you must become its soul. I want to remind people that we have these Beloved Community Talks periodically, and you'll get notified as to when our next Beloved Community Talks will take place. And for me, as they were asking for that one word, and it's always hard for Bernice A. King just to give one word, but the word I'm going to give is a word that we so often long for. It's a word that we all hold on to. It's the word that keeps us moving and keeps us going, and that word is hope. Yes. I hope tonight that what you heard gives you hope. to continue to move forward, gives you hope not to give up, gives you hope to know that you are important, that you are significant, that you have a purpose, as she said, your purpose before someone's opinion. You have a purpose. God puts you here for a distinct purpose. And all you have to do is to tap into that thing that kind of disturbs you sometimes, that kind of keeps you, moving at night. You're restless all the time. That thing that just keep coming back to in society that's troublesome. Something in there is your purpose. And so don't give up on that. We have hope tonight. We have hope because there is a generation of people, and this is not just age, but a generation of people who refuse to quit, who refuse to give up, a generation of people who clearly understand that because we're here, we're going to do what we're supposed to do. And nobody is going to stop us. Nothing is going to stop us. No force is going to stop us. And they can't kill us because we are like Bebe's kids. We're just going to keep multiplying. And it's not a race. It's a group of people who are committed to humanity. Because at the end of the day, we are interconnected and interrelated in a human family. And in the end, we will create and build this beloved community. Thank you. God bless you. We appreciate you. And let's continue to educate ourselves so that we can bring into being this more just, humane, peaceful, and equitable and sustainable world. And I must give a shout out in closing to my niece, Yolanda Renee King. I was so proud of her on today as she shared her heart at the March on Washington. We're in good hands as we move forward. The next generation is here. God bless you and have a wonderful evening.
Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the world when he demonstrated what could be achieved through nonviolence. Now, you can learn how to live and practice this philosophy yourself through Nonviolence 365 Online, an innovative digital experience developed by the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Nonviolence 365 Online features extensive video interviews with real nonviolence practitioners, including the King Center CEO, Dr. Bernice A. King, King Center certified instructors and trainers, and veterans of the civil rights movement. Explorations of the historic campaigns that helped Dr. King forge his philosophy. Immersive, annotated reading experiences that enhance Dr. King's most influential writings on nonviolence. Custom activities, including quizzes and interactive scenarios to help you practice along the way. Real-world exercises to help you start applying nonviolence in your daily life. Nonviolence 365 is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. It isn't just a concept for philosophers or political leaders. Nonviolence 365 is a powerful, practical approach to dealing with conflict and dismantling injustice. Whether it's in your personal life, in your school or workplace, your local community, or a national movement. Dr. King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and many others sought to create the beloved community, a society built on global cooperation and equity. This wasn't a lofty utopian dream. It's a realistic and achievable goal because each and every one of us has the power to make it happen by committing to nonviolence as a way of life. Take the first step today with Nonviolence 365 online.